All right, it's 10:36. I stopped sharing my screen. So this is Reem. Reem's one of our Outrival and Run Formula coaches. She works with Amy and Russet with team and training. And Reem has also started offering a new service through us that is run analysis. She'll tell you a little bit more about that in her talk. So that's another service that's also in your app under upgrades in the Wix app that you can read more about the run analysis. So I'll let Reem take it from here. Thanks for coming on today, Reem.
All right, sure thing. Thanks for having me. So let me just, I got to share my screen first, right? All right, is that up all right? Okay, so my presentation today is on how fast should I run? And I encourage everyone to go ahead and reach out and ask questions while I'm talking. So I just kind of want to start with what the presentation isn't about, and then I'm going to dive into what it is about. So my goal today isn't to tell you what your training program is supposed to be like. That's for your coach to do. So I'm not going to tell you, 12 weeks into your Ironman training, you should be doing tempo repeats or something like that. That's not the goal at all. What my goal is today is basically to walk through a workout. Like if your coach tells you to do a certain workout, what does that mean in terms of intensity, and walk through different intensity factors, different ways to look at run speed. And so as just a presentation overview for today, we'll start out with the QT2 Outrival Run Formula training zones, what they are, and then talk about the different measures of speed. And here we'll look at rate of perceived exertion, heart rate, speed or pace, and then power. And then quickly at the end, touch on how to improve running speed. So starting first with the training zones. So you guys should all know these, see them in your workouts. We have recovery, and then aerobic endurance tempo, threshold tempo, and then your BSC or your super threshold speed efforts. So just very quickly going through what that means in terms of intensity effort. So ZR is your nice, super easy recovery effort. And this is one that people have a very difficult time doing on the run, I would say. More so, like, people seem to be able to handle recovery rides pretty easily. Recovery runs are an entirely different story. There's very few people who comfortably do recovery runs, but they're really important. When they're written into your program, it's important not to do them too hard. So, and then aerobic endurance Z1. So you see this constantly in your workouts, right? This is by far the most common runs, especially in your base building. You might only see these runs for 12 weeks on your schedule, and they're really important just to build your efficiency, your aerobic efficiency. So at the beginning, as you start running, you might say, like, especially if you've been off for a while, oh my God, I can't believe I'm running this slow. Why is this pace this slow? And then if you keep running at that same level of effort with time, that number is going to, your pacing is going to start increasing, and you'll start seeing, instead of that maybe 12-minute mile, now maybe you'll see a 10-minute mile at the same level of effort. So that's the goal with doing a lot of Z1 work. Z2 endurance tempo. So I call this the I say a sentence, you say a sentence pace. So it's still aerobic. You're starting to build up some lactic acid, but it's still a primarily aerobic effort. It's in terms of just thinking about that, like 70.3 running for most people is in the upper end of Z2. Marathon pace for most people tends to be in Z2. You're starting to work a little bit more, but it's not like a crazy heart effort yet. Okay, so Z3 threshold tempo, now we're getting tough. Like, this is the top end of your Z3 is the how fast can I hold this pace for 60 minutes if I am like super well trained? For a lot of people, like when you're coming in, like 60 minutes seems forever in terms of a length of pace. But for most people, this is going to correlate somewhere 10K, 15K pace, maybe half marathon. Like for elite runners, this could be your half marathon pace at the upper end of this. At the lower end, you are looking more like between 10K and half marathon. So the goal here is basically to increase your pace. We use this to try to push out when your threshold, when the lactate threshold occurs. So, and just from a feeling out there, lactate threshold, we can test it, and we do, and we'll talk about that a little later. You guys, most of you did the 320 bike test yesterday. And that is, or on Friday, I'm not sure when you did it, but that basically is testing it on the bike, and you can translate that over into the run. But for me, like I can tell the difference when I'm running below or above lactate threshold by how my stomach feels and what my breathing's like. Like there's that point where you're like, okay, I'm good. Oh, wait a second, I'm not so good anymore. And that's from a feel standpoint, that's your lactate threshold. Okay, and then just the last one is the best sustainable efforts. And this is the super challenging. Don't even try to talk to me pace. This morning I was out doing 400 repeats, and like if I saw someone in the, out running, I'm like, I'm not even looking at you. I had no idea who I was seeing when I ran. So that's what we're looking at with Z4. And so a hard like 5K is going to be at this pace. Sprint distance run at the end, you're running this, like you're turning yourself inside out to be able to hold on to this kind of effort. Okay, so this is the bulk of where I'm going, is we're going to talk about the different measures of speed. So the first one I'm going to start with is rate of perceived exertion. What's my body telling me in terms of how I feel? Then we'll go to heart rate, and then speed, pace, and then power. And I want to start out by saying here that no one indicator is perfect. Sometimes we get really hung up on things, and I'll get things from my athletes going, my heart rate was going crazy today. I don't know what was going on. I had to really change my zones because my heart rate was going crazy. And, sometimes your heart rate goes crazy because your Garmin's not working right. And so what I want to kind of emphasize here is that it's really good to understand and have guidance from all four factors. And some of them are more relevant than others at different pacing, and that you shouldn't be a slave to a single one indicator, but know what the limitations and benefits of all of them are. Okay, so starting with perceived exertion. So it's a subjective measure, how hard you feel like your body is working. So here you're going to get certain indicators on perceived exertion, like you might get, okay, I can, it's no problem. I'm talking, this isn't too bad. You can say, oh, I'm feeling pretty good out there. My breathing is nice and relaxed. I'm not hearing my heart go crazy. I'm like really comfortable. This feels awesome. Or it could be, oh my God, this is really hard. I'm starting to cramp really bad. I feel like my running form's falling apart. I don't think I'm going to make this very far. I mean, your body talks to you. And my goal with perceived exertion is to listen to your body, because it's trying to tell you something. So listen to it and be really in tune with what your body is saying. So this is a scale of 1 to 10 for perceived exertion. Is the easiest way to look at it, is on that scale. With 1 being like, this is, I'm lying on the couch, and 10 being like, oh my God, my head's exploding. So if you start out in our, like from a perceived exertion standpoint, the QT2 zones measure up. So recovery is 3 or less. Like this is, I can sing level of effort, like no problem. You've got your favorite tunes on and you're like hammering out to them. And the person you pass on the street is like, what the heck? Like, why is that person singing? It's so easy. Z1 is that comfortable conversation pace. You're running with a friend, or you're on the phone. Like if I always say this for my athletes, like Z1 is the pace that if I call you, I should know you're exercising. I should be aware of it. My thing is to say, hey, what's going on? Because I know that they're doing something. But they should be able to say, oh, this is what's going on. I'm on a run and it's really nice outside. And like, they're able to talk to me. It shouldn't be like, well, I'm out, like this, it should be a fairly comfortable, like Z1, when you are fit, should be the pace that you can run forever and kind of thing. So, and then as we get to, so on a scale of 1 to 10, Z1 is your 4 to 6, 6.5, like in that range somewhere. Tempo now starts getting a little harder. You're starting to feel a little sweat, starting to feel mildly uncomfortable, but you can keep going for an extended period of time in tempo. And then as we start building and we go to Z3, it starts getting more uncomfortable and your body starts talking. And then by the time you're at Z4, BSE, like, you're working super hard out there. Okay, so pros and cons of RPE. So the biggest pro is it's easy to use. You don't need anything. You don't need a heart rate monitor. You don't need a stopwatch. You don't need speed. You don't need anything. You just go out and you run and you say, how am I feeling? And if you know your body, it gets to be a pretty good indicator. So no equipment is necessary and it's relevant across all zones. You can tell based on how you feel whether you're in ZR or Z4. I mean, like it's important. It's something, it's an indicator no matter how fast you're going. The cons are that it's subjective. So as an athlete, when you're trying to communicate with your coach, like on Training Peaks, it asks you to list a number in terms of how hard you felt your workout was. And I'll tell you, some people will say, the range of what people characterize a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 4, like it's different. So as a coach, we need to kind of know our athletes. We guide them and we say, okay, well, this is what a 6 feels like, or this is what a 5 feels like. But at the same time, I know that different ones my athletes are characterizing differently. So we need to, you have to be in communication and understand from an athlete coach perspective when you say something, or when I tell an athlete, I want you to run at a 6 out of 10, that they know what a 6 out of 10 is and that we're on the same page. And it's impacted by external factors. And I'm going to kind of go through some of these. When I say it's impacted by external factors, I mean that there's things that happen in your life that change how hard you think something is, right? So if you haven't slept enough, that effort might feel harder than it will if you're fresh. If you've had caffeine, all of a sudden you might be like, wow, this is so easy. I feel great, and you might be running faster than you're supposed to. If you're distracted, you're out running with music. Sometimes you don't realize that you're running harder than you're supposed to be running. If you are anxious about a workout, so sometimes that you've got an 800 repeat workout on your schedule and you're like, oh my God, and you get anxious about it. Or you're looking and there's something wrong, it's a super cloudy day and your Garmin isn't picking up your GPS right and your speed isn't where you think it should be. All of a sudden it's like, oh, this feels harder, So there's things that impact RPE. So so between it being subjective and it being impacted by things, it makes it not perfect. Right? But it's a good indicator. Okay, so next one, and this is probably from QT2 system standpoint, the area that we rely on the most, right? Heart rate zones. And we figured out what they are. So we know that these are training zones and they're based on threshold. So QT2 USA Triathlon, in Training Peaks, you go into it and you know what your thing is. I think probably people should know where this is, but I'm going to go into my Training Peaks here quick and just show you, just so you know. So I'm going to go into mine. I had a pretty good week, did most of my workouts this week, so that was good. All right, so here you are in zones, and then within that, within heart rate. So you should have in here, in your heart rate, where you have your threshold. And I have a super high threshold. My run threshold is 206. It's not normal, but it is my normal. And so you go through here and it's calculated, and they're calculated based on the ranges. So Training Peaks automatically, you put in threshold, you put in type, lactate threshold, you put in here running, and your coach should have done this for you. And it will automatically calculate what your zones are based on these numbers. So, and it calculates it out. So your ZR number here is anything below 76. You have your gray zone, which is the zone you never want to run in. And then you have everything else. So Z1 is automatically calculated 80 to 86, and it just works it out. So you should know what those zones are. They should be in your Training Peaks account. If they aren't, then give your coach a ring and make sure that they do find their way in there. So let me just go back to my screen over here. Okay, so let's move on here. All right, so okay, easy enough though. I just told you, no problem. You know what the ranges are. But then there's a big question, right? Well, what's that threshold? What's the number that gets put into threshold? And of course, that's a huge question mark. And we have a lot of indicators. So in general, as coaches, what we do for triathletes is we take the 320 test as your starting standpoint. And we know what your cycling threshold is based on that. And we take away 10. That's the starting point. And that, works for some people, but I have athletes that are closer. Their cycling and running are definitely closer than 10. And I have some where their cycling and running are as far apart as maybe 20. So the 320 is a good place to start. But then your coach will do adjustments. If you are a pure runner, you might look at it from other place, do a 30-minute max effort time trial or a 5K race, and you take your final 20 minutes. You can do it based on like Z1 training. So you can do it based on a race. But I'm going to say like all of these are estimates. So what I'll do like for my athletes is I'll start out with a number in mind, and then I watch. I spend, especially for a new athlete, I will watch them. I will just say, I want you to go out and run at this level of effort, and I'll watch what's going on with their heart rate, and I'll try to adjust so I get a decent training zone from them based on everything that I see. And then from there, then we have heart rate zones, and you can work them in, and you have some pretty good ranges. And I will emphasize that they are ranges. If your Z1 range is 130 to 140 and you have a Z1 run, it doesn't mean you have to be at 140 the whole time, right? It's like there is a range, and it's meant to, you're not always supposed to do everything at the hardest end of a range. So pros and cons of heart rate. So pros, it's easy to use, right? I mean, heart rate monitors they've been out there forever. It's nice and easy. It's data driven. So you know what your threshold heart rate is. And you can just do that. And I encourage everyone to use zones based on that threshold and not based on that, 220 minus your age, because that doesn't work very well. And then they're consistent over time, right? So theoretically, your heart rate zones are going to get a little lower, one beat lower every year. And I'm saying theoretically because mine really haven't changed. I mean, I'm 51 years old right now, and I still have a threshold heart rate of 206 on the run. Like, it's not really explainable, but it is where it is. But they're pretty consistent. Like, so once you have them set up, they are consistent. They are consistent whether you are fit or whether you are untrained right now. They are like, that's where they are. They're just, once you set them, they're really good. So that's that's pretty useful to know. They're a good indicator of fatigue, freshness, overtraining. And so if you are tired, and varies from people to people. So, but if you're tired, your heart rate will tend to have a more difficult time getting up. And that's an indicator that you're tired. If you're fresh, your heart rate might be like higher, like with a zone. And then if you're overtrained, it means like a good indicator of that is that you're unable at all to get your heart rate up. So that's a really good indicator that you have to step back for a little while. So it's really useful in a lot of ways. It helps you set your pacing, your level of intensity. The cons are it's impacted by external factors. And so a lot of these are the same ones I talked about with RPE, but they might not necessarily point in the same direction. So heart rate is going to be impacted by like heat, humidity, wind, So our heart rate tends to be higher in hot conditions than it is in cooler conditions. It tends to be higher if we're trying to fight against the wind. If our hydration isn't sufficient, you might see your heart rate going up over time as over the course of a workout. Sleep, medications, caffeine. So it does, like, there's things that your heart rate isn't exactly the same on any given day. Technology is not always accurate. And here a lot of people are using the wrist straps on instead of a chest straps, they're using the wrist monitor, and they have improved remarkably, I think, over the years, but they're not as accurate, I don't think, for anyone. For some people, they're pretty close. But a lot of the time, like especially at the beginning of the workout, the wrist monitor takes a while to pick up accurately. And then there's also a delay with recovery on the wrist ones. And sometimes, like, honestly, like, Garmin does weird things and there's spikes. And so it's not always perfect. But so that's just something to keep in mind. And also say it's not a great, heart rate is really good for ZR, Z1, longer tempo repeats. It's not great once you start doing the hard and short efforts, because your heart, like, especially for highly aerobic athletes, it's really hard to quickly get your heart rate up quickly. So what will happen a lot, if you're over reliant on heart rate, then a lot of people just go too hard at the beginning of workouts, right? At the beginning of a race, because, like, I know my heart rate curve, it takes me about 20 minutes for it to pick up and like sort of measure to catch up with my RPE. Or my pace. So a lot of people will look at the beginning and they know that they're supposed to be in Z2, and their Z2 heart rate is 150 to 160. So they'll go out like crazy hard to try to get their heart rate to that number. And then, you know what, they're going too hard. And then now their heart rate, they've already hit like Z2, they've like accelerated hitting that from heart rate. And now they're going too hard, they're going too fast, and they have to like take a few steps back to recover. So there's some cons to it, especially at the higher intensities. Okay, so the next indicator is pace or speed, and we have a few different places here. I'm just trying to, hold on, I went backwards. Sorry, back up here. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few different pace calculators that are available to you. So if you are doing run only pacing, so you're training for a marathon, half marathon, then I'd recommend that you use the Run Formula pace calculator. And the links are all in here, but they're all on the websites, and they're pretty obvious where you click onto them on the website. So this is what your pace calculator looks like. You stick in your 5K time, you stick in your training, your bike and run training mileage, years of experience, what your race distance is. So I'm going to go ahead and just put one in. Okay, let's say my 5K is 30 minutes and I'm training for a marathon. So I'm running, let's say my peak weeks are at 50 miles and I'm cross training. So doing about 100 miles on the bike, and I'm an experienced runner. I've been running for 10 years and 26.2, and it's a flat course. There's a little variation. So we'll put in 10 feet. And then it goes ahead, and this is, it calculates for you what your estimated paces are based on that 5K time and based on all of your other things that you input. So it will give you your very specific paces, and in here too, it will give you what your training paces are. And I will tell you that most people look at this and think that their Z1 is way too slow. They're like, no. My Z1's not that slow. So I find that people tend to run their Z1 runs too fast because they think that they should be running faster, but it also gives you these other indicators. So where, this is interesting to use from a pace standpoint, and what I think is different about our pace calculators versus some others. And there's a lot of different run calculators out there. But one thing that's different with the QT2 systems ones is that it factors in cross training, and it factors in experience, and it factors in volume. And so the longer your race distance is, the more difference you'll start seeing here. So if I have my same run time, but now instead of running 50 miles a week, I'm only running 25 miles a week. And now I'm not biking, and now I am a new runner and I do the same race. This is going to give me much slower pacing average for the marathon. And that's our critical volume, you know, theory is that the more you, to be able to run effectively, to be able to run to your capability, you need to be able to put in the volume. So it'll change. So this is, I think, a useful calculator for us. And and then there's the other one. So both Outrival and QT2 have their own calculators as well. And for these ones, now instead of just running, this is assuming that you're going in with your triathlon. So you're here now, you're putting in a bunch of different things and what course you're training for. But at the end of the day, it'll give you similar guidance in terms of your pacing, but now it'll give you guidance more in terms of your triathlon pacing versus open run pacing. So these are useful, and it's something that your coach can use with you for races. It's something that you can just put in yourself and just to play around with and stuff like that. So it's all on your members pages on your website. You can get into it pretty easily. Okay, so next, so this is just a screenshot of the Run Formula One. So these pace calculators all require that you have a 5K time. So best way to have a 5K time is to do a 5K race, right? I mean, that's the easiest, that gets you out there. But if you don't know what your 5K time is, then there's other ways to do it. So there's a couple different time trials that you can do on the track, and a 5K one and a 3K time trial that I use. So for people who are newer to running, these are hard efforts, right? So these are, and let me just go to the next page, because the first page is, there's a really long warm up you're doing. So you're starting out, you're taking your time. By the time you are starting your workout, you're already a good 20 to 30 minutes in. So you really need to take your time with the warm up. And then your main set for the 5K time trial is 4 by 1600 with only 90 seconds rest. So you're basically doing 4 by a mile at maximum sustainable. So this is a very hard effort. It's not one that I would recommend that anybody do when they're like, oh, I haven't run in 6 months. And they go out and they try to do this, like, you'll kill yourself, and it's not going to be all that useful. So this is a tough one. And usually when I'm writing training programs for people, this one isn't showing up until well into their, until we really need to know what speed is, until they have a really solid aerobic base. So, but basically what it is you go to the track, you do your long warm up, then you do 4 by 1600 on 90 seconds rest, taking your time to build into it, like your first 100 meters to build in, but it's maximum sustainable pace. So the goal is not only you're holding consistent pace within each 1600, but your first and your second and your third and your fourth 1600 are all reasonably similar in pace. So you shouldn't have like massive fluctuations in speed. So then when you're done with it, you figure out what your average pace is, and that's your 5K pace. And I'm going to put a caveat in here to say that people tend to run quicker on the track than they do out on the roads. So if you think that you're going to be doing your speed work on the roads, then you can do this as 4 by a mile out on the roads. And that's going to give you a better indicator of what your pacing is for roads. If you're going to be doing your speed work on your tracks and you want to know what your 400 split is, then doing the time trial on the track is more relevant. So this will help you give, and then you can use this 5K time to put into the Run Formula or Outrival or QT2 calculators and figure out what your pace is and your race paces and what your ZR, Z1, Z2 paces and stuff are. So the 3K variation now is one that I'll use for people who are maybe not quite as progressed in the running. It's a little easier, although it's still a very challenging workout. Again, not one to do on your first day back to running. Same warm up, really take your time, but now instead of doing 4 by a mile, you're doing a shorter set. So you're doing a total of 1200, but or a total of 3K, but the rest is shorter. And again, you can translate this to on the road, because so you're going to be running faster on the track, but your 3K pace to convert from 3K to 5K is about 15 to 20 seconds slower per mile. So that's just another way to sort of back into what your 5K pace would be. And those calculators also give you the pacing that you would use for your speed intervals. So if your coach is putting into your workout, I want you to do, 16 by 400, then these are the numbers that the pace calculators come out with. These are the numbers that as coaches we have as our guidance. But I'm going to say that your coach may give you different numbers. Like when I give people quarter miles, I usually don't do them at 5K minus 40 seconds. I use them as 5K efforts. So I'll start, if their thing is a 16 by 400, I'll say do the first 2 at 10K, do the middle 12 at 5K, and do the final 2 at 3K or 5K finish as fast as you can go. So I'm going to say that these paces that are calculated through the calculators are on the fast end of what you would do. So just follow whatever guidance is. But this just gives you a sense. Obviously, the shorter the workout is, the quicker your pace is going to be out there. Okay, and one other thing I just want to touch briefly on is that if you are racing, a lot of people will work in walk intervals into the races. And so this is just kind of a nice little calculator that's out there. It's a walk break calculator. So if you say overall, I want to run a 9-minute mile, you can put into this thing, and I'll just take you through one really quick here. So you just put in there, I have my walking pace is a 17-minute mile. I'm running for 5 minutes. I'm walking for a minute, and I want to do a 9:06 pace. That's what is on here. And then it calculates from here, and it says if I want to do an overall pace of a 9-minute 9:06, then I have to do my runner intervals at 8:20. So that's just sort of, to give you a sense. You're like, okay, I want to, theoretically, if you're capable of it, run a 4-hour marathon, and I want to walk a certain amount of time in there, then this just gives you a good sense of what you need to be doing when you're running based on your walking. So that kind of can help set things up for you. Okay, so moving along. Okay, so pros and cons of pace or speed. So pros is it's easy to use. It's data driven. Like I just went through all those calculators. You know what you're supposed to do. You know what your pacing is, right? It's real time. You look at your watch, you look down, it says I'm running a 7:45-minute mile. Okay, great. Move on. Super easy to use, right? The cons are that your speed zones, they change with your training, right? I think I mentioned at the beginning, if you're new, like you're new to running and you go out to do your Z1 aerobic work at the beginning, that number may be a 12-minute mile. After 2 months of running in Z1, that number may change to 10 minutes. And what your other training zones are going to be is going to also change depending on your level of fitness. So your speed zones might be different at the beginning of the season than they are at the end of the season. So they do need to be updated. You can't just do them once and rely on them. You need to come back to it based on, so if you have a recent race you just kind of keep adjusting and playing with those. Speed is highly impacted by hills and ground surface and wind. So if you're running into the wind or the wind's at your back, you might see 20 or 30-second difference in your speed. If you're out and your workout says, I want you to do 5K hill repeats, like how fast do you know? Well, my 5K pace is an 8-minute mile, but what's my 5K hill pace? Like, I don't know. What am I, what's it supposed to be? So there are some cons to speed. I think that it plays out too in races that people tend to race hills too fast if they're trying to go based on speed. Ground surface is different. If you're running on a trail versus you're running on asphalt, you're going to have different speed. Technology, like sometimes the GPS, if you're running in a city or you're running and it's cloudy out, like your GPS might not pick up your speed. If you're running curves versus running tangents, like it's not always perfect in terms of speed. And on this one, I say that it doesn't always take into account the impact of external factors, right? It says if I say my speed for my 5K pacing is supposed to be an 8:14, well, you know what? If it's hot outside, my 5K pacing is not going to be an 8:14. Like, it's not taking it into account accurately. So you do need to know that speed is going to vary based on what's around you. And again, like hills and ground surface and stuff like that. So pros and cons, just like with everything else. So the last one I want to touch on is power, which is definitely newer to running. A lot of us use power on the bike. For running, the power that most people use is the Stride, which is just a little pod that goes on your running shoe. Polar and Coros both have their own power sensors that you can get as well. The Stride works with just about anything, so that's what people tend to use so far. It's similar to bike power in terms of how you set it. So instead of calling it threshold or FTP, it's referred to as critical power, but it's basically what your 60-minute power is, 60-minute trained power. So, but like with cycling, we don't want to test our power by going out and killing ourselves for 60 minutes. So there's different ways to calculate what your power zones are. So training intensity, and here's where I want to give you a little caveat. So at QT2, we don't have power zones. We don't have them set up. So we don't have things for running. We don't have them. So these power zones are the Stride power zones. I'm going to explain a little bit how we can modify these, but they're not so off of our training zones when you look at them, right? So easy is your ZR to your lower end of Z1. Zone 2 over here lines up fairly well with our tempo 2s, and 3 lines up with your threshold. So lines up pretty well with Z3. And then 4 and 5 are your BSE, your longer repetitions. So they're not like crazy off of them, and they're certainly a reasonable place to start. But one other way that you can do this is if you know, like for the higher intensity intervals, I'm going out and I'm doing my 5K intervals, and you just start looking at what those numbers are. So you use them more like to say, okay, my 5K interval time is an 8:14, that correlates with a power number of 210. So now if I'm doing 5K hill repeats, my speed's going to be different, but my power will be the same. So I can just try to hit those 210 power numbers when I'm running. So we can kind of line it up. You say, okay, well, my marathon pacing, when I go out and I'm working based on knowing what my RPE and my heart rate and my speed, I know what my marathon effort is. And then you look at your power meter and says, okay, well, that's correlating to a 180 watts. Well, now you can use your watts as an indicator. So when you're out there running and you have variations based on wind or based on hills, your power numbers can almost substitute for what you would be looking at speed otherwise. So there's definitely ways to work with power. How you calculate your critical power. I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail. I'll show you at the end that there was a whole presentation on Stride and power on the run. So I'll give you what the link is. But basically, there's a track test where you do, they call it the 3-6, but it really should be the other way. It's the 6-3, where you go out and you run 6 laps on the track. You take a long recovery, you run another 3 laps on the track, and it's calculated from there. Similar to that, there's an on the road, a 9-3. You can do 30 minutes at best effort. So like I said, with pace calculators, the 30-minute max effort test is used quite a bit for both heart rate and speed for run only. You can do it from a race, and Stride just lets you input certain things and then calculate critical power based on that. And also Stride automatically will calculate stuff. So all you have to do is go out and run, but you do need to do variable work. If all you do is go out and run at Z1, your Stride has no idea that that's your Z1. Like, it doesn't know if you're doing 5K work every day, if you're doing Z1. So you have to go out there and do some slow runs and some fast runs and intervals and stuff like that. And the more that you do, then Stride calculates it and readjusts it automatically. So opportunities to use power. I've touched on this briefly here, that you can set a pacing strategy based on power. So using the other factors, you go and you figure out like, okay, my 5K power should be this. And then when you go to a race where other things are varied, and maybe your heart rate's running fast because you're recovered, and it's a hilly run, and so speed isn't all that useful. Here you can look at power and say, these are the power numbers that I want to try to hit. And it will then let you adjust. So instead of saying I'm trying to hit that 8:14 pace, you can say I'm trying to hit my 2:10 power number. And so I'm going to go slower or faster based on the wind direction, the curves on the course, something like. Things are going to vary a little bit. And you can use it for those tempo and speed workouts and your hill workouts. And another useful place is if you're playing around with your technique, you can see how playing around with your technique can impact your power. And if you're generating more power by playing around with your cadence or your stride, or just working on things, you can see it. I would say that where power is less useful is at the easier zones when you're running, like doing your ZR and Z1 runs. I think it's less useful there. Pros and cons of power. It's data driven. Again, like speed, you stick in the numbers, they come out, you know what you're supposed to do. It's real time. There's no delays on power, right? You look down at your watch, it tells you what your power is. It's right there. It's absolute. So it's not impacted by wind or hills or ground surface. It's the number. The power number is the number is the number. It's right there. It's right in front of you. The con, similar to speed, is the power zones change with training, so they need to be updated. You can't just set it at the beginning of the year and go on with it. So they do need to be regularly updated to be useful. As with speed, it doesn't take into account the impact of external factors. So some days, like if it's really hot outside, you might not want to be running at the same kind of power. Like sometimes it'll push you to be doing an intensity that isn't appropriate for the conditions. But less so, I would say, of everything, that power is less impacted by things, because it's not impacted by it's not impacted by hills or surface. So technology, hold on a second. It's getting a little louder here. Okay, so technology, again, it's not always accurate. You could be out running with power and all of a sudden you get this thing saying power meter is dying, and it clicks off. Like you can just lose it, right? Sometimes, less so than like it's not reliant on GPS, so it doesn't have some of the same downsides that speed has. So, I think it's better that way. But I had one time, I don't know, there was something wrong with someone's stride, and they went out and ran. They're like, oh, my power's 400. I'm like, there is no way your power's 400. It just isn't. I mean, like, not a chance based on what you're doing. So it needs to be, like you need to know what's working. But in general, I think it's pretty good. I've been running. I added power with my runs probably 3 or 4 months ago, and I find it useful out there. Like today I was doing 5K repeats, and I'm doing them out on the road. So I don't have consistent conditions. So I'll look and I'll say, okay, my power numbers were all pretty close on my repeats, while my speed varied probably almost 30 seconds per mile based on where the wind was. And if I was running a curvy course, or if there was I live in Florida, so not that many hills, but a few like areas where there's bumps. So it's useful in that sense. I thought it was good. One other con to power is that there's different elements of power. There's the power that moves you forward, and then there's the power that holds your form, and that's called form power. So the power, any energy that you're putting into just staying in a position or going up and down isn't driving you forward. And so depending on how much of your power comes from form power, just seeing an increase in total power, it's like total cholesterol, the factors that go into it. So if you are improving your form power, your total power may end up going down, but your forward generating power may be higher. So you just need to, like anything, if you're using something, you need to have an understanding of what goes into it. But fortunately, there's a ridiculous amount of data that's out there that you can look at that can kind of help you do it. So, okay. I'm going to go on here and talk about running speed. And so the simple equation for running speed is it's stride rate times stride length. So if you want to get faster, you need to improve one or the other of those. And that's an easy, almost everyone runs with cadence, right? So if you look at your cadence in Training Peaks when you download it, and you're seeing that number for cadence in the 70s or low 80s, this is an area you need to work on. No one should be running with a cadence of 75. It's not productive for you. If that number is because you're running 2 minutes and walking 1 minute, that's different. But like if you're doing straight running, how many times do you see in your run workouts target a cadence of 88 to 92? And you're like, no, whatever. I'm not paying any attention to that. But that's an important place that you can increase. If you can increase your cadence from 80 to 90, or 80, let's say 80 to 88, that's a 10% increase in cadence. If you're maintaining your stride length, you're going to go 10% faster. So that's an area to work on, and working on stride rate. A lot of that comes from your run technique. So Jackie mentioned at the beginning that one of the services that I started providing now is to do a run analysis with you. And so you take a bunch of videos, you send them over to me. I look at your technique. I talk to you, get a background in terms of where you are and what's going on, any injury issues that you have. I can also look at the data that's coming off of your Garmin or other watch to see, and then we can work on technique and make changes to it to try to increase your run pacing. But technique, I mean, here's my long list of things, how you can improve your run speed. Technique is one of them. Number one on the list, though, is developing a strong aerobic base. Like, can't underestimate the importance of spending time at Z1 and just developing that base. Because if your Z1 pace is 12 minutes, then your fast pace is going to be limited by your lack of aerobic efficiency. As you start improving your Z1 pace, everything's going to get faster. So you can't cheat on that. If you're running a 5K, there's more cheating you can do. You're doing an Ironman, you just can't cheat on it in any way. You got to put in the time. Incorporating strength is very important, because you can, if you don't have the strength to run, and a lot of that's your lateral, your hip stability, your rotational core strength, and you start getting tired, you're going to lose pace over time. So it may not be strength training will make your top end faster, but more importantly, it'll make your sustained speed faster and cause you to fatigue later out in time. Incorporating flexibility. If you don't have good hip flexor flexibility, you're going to have a hard time getting your feet in the right position and a hard time extending your stride length enough. Technique, as I mentioned, awareness of what you're doing. That's like just your cognitive awareness of what your run feels like, and realizing, oh my God, I'm getting tired. I'm starting to slump over, or I'm starting to reach out in front of me with my feet, like changes that happen with fatigue, like just being aware of them and knowing what you're going to tell your body to trigger your reset is important. And then all the, other things, nutrition, hydration, rest and recovery, all of that is going to impact your running speed. And then I'm going to finish with where I started perhaps, and that's listening to your coach, communicating with your coach. Your coach has a plan for you, and you should follow that plan. If you have questions, you should ask them. If you disagree, you should say it. You should have the conversation. Nothing is like, I'm always adjusting based on the feedback I get. So be in line, have the same concepts, be in the same place with your coach. But going out, run injuries, the best way to run fast is to make sure you're not injured. And so you want to avoid the common mistakes of too fast, too much, wrong time, not enough recovery, missing sessions. One of my least favorite things to see when I see input from people is, I felt great, so I ran a minute faster per pace than I was supposed to. So that's basically it. I'm just going to mention a couple things. So the run, I did a run gait analysis webinar for athletes a couple weeks ago. That's available on the member site if anyone wants to take a look at it. And that's good whether you want to do, have me formally analyze, or you just, it'll give you some good indications of what things go into run gait and areas that you can improve, and just from yourself, like how you can look at your own videos. There's a one on power very specifically, and then another one from pacing, and these are all in your member area that you can go to and get some more information, some supplemental information from today. Okay, I think I went long, but hopefully not too bad. So
that was great. No, you're good on time. Any questions for Reem? Your presentation was so thorough.
nothing.
If you have any questions. Well, if anyone thinks of any questions after the fact, there's Reem's email right there. It's very simple, reem@outrivalracing.com. Feel free to reach out to her if you have any questions. In regards to the run gait analysis, also feel free to reach out to Reem. And
I actually have a question.
Oh, there we go.
Reem, when we're looking at our run paces, and then we want to spend more time in the woods, how should we adjust those? Should we, like, because our heart rate's obviously going to react differently in the woods than on the road.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those two. That's an area that power can be useful too, because your power is not going to change, you know, over time. And running in the woods, your pacing is going to tend to be lower. I mean, just between the road surface conditions, even if you're just running in an open, like flat dirt road, you're going to run slower than you do on the roads. But usually you start adding trail running, and you have roots, and you have hills, and you have trees and stuff like that. And that's where really, you know, just heart rate and RPE are more relevant than pace in the woods, I think.
Thanks.
So,
I have a question too.
yeah, go ahead.
I am spending most of my time in Colorado right now, so I'm training at like 7,500 feet, and everything feels hard.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you definitely get the benefit when you come back down here. And is there a general rule of thumb on kind of, you know, the altitude? I mean, I've seen altitude, you know, pace calculators before, but you know, it's always nice to have a live human being who's super knowledgeable to.
Oh, geez. Yeah. Altitude pacing is not an area I'm super knowledgeable, unfortunately. I mean, I know, like, with time, your body's going to adjust to the altitude and you can pick up your pacing a little bit, but I would just not worry too much about pacing. Like, you'll find later, like with time, what your new pacing is. But at the beginning, just staying with heart rate and RPE until you see where your adjusted pacing is. You know, you can go out and sometimes even just doing like a Z1 time trial. Like, you just go out and, you know, if you're pretty familiar with what your Z1 is supposed to feel like from a level of effort and heart rate, you can go out and you can run it for 30 minutes and just see what that pacing is, and back into like a pace calculator from there.
Yeah. And
So,
that's I've been pretty much going off of heart rate, because
and I think that's good, because everything, you know, when people like first move out to altitude, a friend of mine just moved from Naples, Florida out to Boulder, and her pacing's just a little bit different out there, you know, because all of a sudden now you're training, and I think also, like, doing intensity at altitude, it's so much harder to catch your breath and everything after you do, because your heart rate will jump up pretty quick. But
okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Reem.